My name is Henry, and in the summer of 1889, Newport was a stage, and the grand cottages that lined its rocky shores were the elaborate sets. I was just a boy, barely 14, with hands already calloused from handling reins and polishing brass, working as a stable hand for the Vanderbilts. From my vantage point, mucking out stalls and exercising thoroughbreds, I saw a side of Newport that most never did. I saw the carriages arriving at dawn after all-night balls, the drivers slumped, the horses steaming. I saw the footmen polishing, silver until it gleamed like moonlight, and the maids scurrying through back corridors, their faces tired but their gossip sharp as needles. It was a world of immense wealth, of shimmering silks and diamond necklaces, of strict rules and even stricter whispers. Our stable, a magnificent structure of polished wood and gleaming brass, sat on the edge of the Vanderbilt estate, close enough to hear the faint strains of waltz music drifting from the ballroom on a summer evening, but far enough to remain in our own separate world. My life was horses, their scent, their warmth, the rhythmic thud of their hooves on the dirt. It was a simple, honest life, far removed from the intricate dances and veiled judgments of high society. Yet, even in the stables, the ripples of Newport's social currents reached us, carried on the wind like the scent of expensive cigars and fading perfume, and no ripple was larger, no whisper louder, than the one surrounding Miss Eleanor Vance. Before her disgrace, Eleanor Vance had been the undisputed queen of Newport society. Her beauty was legendary, a delicate, almost ethereal quality that seemed to shimmer even in the bright sunlight. She had eyes the color of the sea on a stormy day, and hair like spun moonlight. Her family, the Vances, were old Newport money, not as ostentatious as the new industrialists, but with a lineage that stretched back generations, giving them an air of untouchable aristocracy. Her engagement to Mr. Sterling Thorne, a man whose family fortune was built on railroads and whose influence stretched from New York to Chicago, had been the talk of the season. Their union was meant to solidify two empires, to create a dynasty of unparalleled power and prestige. I had seen Miss Vance many times before her fall. She would often ride her mare, a spirited chestnut named Aurora, through the bridle paths that wound through the estates. I'd be exercising one of the Vanderbilt horses, and she would pass, a vision of elegance in her riding habit, her laughter like tiny bells carried on the breeze. She always had a kind word for us stable hands, a rare quality among the ladies of her standing. She would even bring Aurora to our stable for special shoeing, and I remember admiring the way she treated her horse, not just as property, but as a beloved companion. She was admired, envied, and seemed utterly untouchable. Then came the summer of 1889, and with it, the scandal. It began as a tremor, a faint vibration in the carefully constructed edifice of Newport society, and quickly escalated into a seismic shock. The engagement to Mr. Thorne was abruptly broken. Not a quiet, mutual parting, but a public, humiliating rupture. Whispers spread like wildfire, carried on the lips of maids and footmen, amplified in drawing rooms and at hushed tea parties. The official story was irreconcilable differences, a polite euphemism that fooled no one. The real story, the one whispered behind gloved hands, was far more scandalous. It was said that Miss Vance had been discovered in a compromising situation, not with Mr. Thorne, but with another man. A man of no standing. A painter, they said. A bohemian artist from New York, utterly unsuitable for a lady of her stature. Some even whispered he was already married. The details were murky, deliberately obscured by the Vance family to protect their name, but the damage was done. In Newport, a broken engagement was a social misstep. A broken engagement due to an inappropriate liaison was an unforgivable sin. The socialites who had once flocked around her now turned their backs. Invitations stopped arriving. Her name, once spoken with reverence, was now uttered with a sneer, or worse, with a chilling pity. She was cut from society, a fate worse than death for a woman of her position. Her laughter, once like bells, vanished. Her rides on Aurora ceased. The Grand Vance cottage, once a hub of glittering parties, became a silent, brooding monument to her disgrace. I still saw her sometimes. She would appear at the stable, a shadow of her former self, to check on Aurora. Her eyes, once bright as the stormy sea, were now dulled, shadowed with a profound sadness. Her clothes, though still fine, seemed to hang on her as if she had shrunk within them. She never spoke to me directly, but I felt her presence, a quiet sorrow that permeated the air around her. She was a bird with broken wings, trapped in a gilded cage. The summer wore on, and the whispers about Miss Vance began to shift. From scandal, they turned to concern, then to something akin to fear. She became a recluse, seen less and less even, by her own household staff. Her carriage, once a familiar sight on the roads, remained in the stable, gathering dust. The lights in the Vance mansion, which had once blazed with the brilliance of 100 chandeliers, now remained dark, save for a single dim glow in an upper window, a lonely beacon in the vast, empty house. My duties often took me past the Vance estate. I would lead the Vanderbilt horses along the bridle path that skirted her property, and I would always glance towards her mansion. It was a habit, a silent check on the fallen queen. The gardens, once meticulously manicured, were beginning to show signs of neglect. The rose bushes overgrown, the gravel paths choked with weeds. It was a mirror of her own decline, a visible manifestation of her withdrawal from the world. One late August evening, just as the last sliver of twilight was fading from the sky, I was leading a horse back to the stable after an evening ride. The air was still and heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. As I passed the Vance estate, I noticed something peculiar. The single dim light in the upper window was gone. The entire mansion was plunged into darkness, a black silhouette against the fading sky. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the front door. It was slightly ajar, a narrow sliver of deeper darkness against the already dark stone. It was late, far too late for any visitor, and the servants would have long since secured the house for the night. A cold prickle ran down my spine. It was a small detail, easily dismissed, but in the oppressive silence of that evening it felt profoundly wrong. It felt like an invitation, or a warning. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was about to begin, and I, a mere stable boy, was about to become an unwitting witness to its sinister tale. The sight of that open door in the gloom of the August evening was like a cold hand on my heart. Every rule of my simple life, every lesson I had ever learned about the polite boundaries of society, told me to turn away, to go back to the stable, to forget what I had seen. But a feeling, a profound sense of dread mixed with a restless curiosity, held me in place. The mansion was a silent, brooding silhouette against the fading sky, all its windows dark. The open door was a narrow, inviting wound in its stone facade, a promise of a secret that was waiting to be discovered. I tied the reins of the horse I was leading to a fence post, and with my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest, I crept up the long gravel driveway. The air around the Vance mansion was still and heavy, carrying the faint, sweet scent of overgrown roses. The front door, a heavy oak monstrosity with a gleaming brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, was ajar just enough for a person to slip through. I pushed it open with a trembling hand, the hinges groaning with a sound that echoed in the profound silence of the grand entryway. The interior of the mansion was a vast, echoing cavern of shadows and gloom. Moonlight, a pale, cold sliver of light, fell through a stained glass window, casting a ghostly, multicolored pattern on the black and white tiled floor. The air inside smelled of dust and disuse and something else. A faint, lingering scent of dried roses, the same scent that clung to Miss Vance's riding habit. I didn't dare go inside. I was a stable boy, an outsider, a ghost in this magnificent, sorrowful house. I just stood in the doorway, my small body a beacon of fear and forbidden knowledge, and peered into the darkness. On the floor, just inside the entrance, I saw something that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. It was a single pearl. It was small, a perfectly formed orb of iridescent white, and it looked terribly out of place on the cold, unforgiving stone floor. It was a pearl from a woman's necklace, a sign of hurried, careless departure. I took a step inside, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest, and bent down to pick it up. It was cold and smooth beneath my fingers, a tiny, silent testament to a truth that was waiting to be discovered. I ran back to the stable, the pearl clutched in my hand, its coldness a constant, heavy reminder of the terrible, unspoken secret I had just stumbled upon. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in my small bunk, the pearl in my palm, and listened to the distant, mournful cry of a loon on the still, dark water of the bay. I knew that something was wrong. I knew that the silence of the Vance mansion was not the silence of a house at rest, but the silence of a house with a secret. The next day, the storm broke. It wasn't a storm of wind and rain, but a storm of frantic, worried voices. A household servant, the old butler named Mr. Finch, had gone to wake Miss Vance, and found her room empty. The bed was untouched. Her clothes, her jewelry, her personal belongings, they were all there, untouched. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The news spread like wildfire through the back corridors of the estates, carried on. The lips of maids and stable hands, amplified in drawing rooms and at hushed tea parties. The disgrace of Miss Eleanor Vance had now turned into a genuine, terrifying mystery. The police were called, but they were a joke. They were men of the city, men of science and logic, and they were utterly out of their depth in the world of Newport's high society. They took one look at the opulent, empty mansion. They heard the whispers of her disgrace, and they immediately concluded that she had run away. They thought she had fled her shame, disappeared into the city, or perhaps even sailed to Europe to start a new life. They saw an open window, they saw a woman scorned, and they saw a convenient narrative. They saw a disgraced socialite, not a missing person. They did not see the open front door, they did not see the single pearl, and they did not see the cold. Hard proof that something was terribly wrong. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to tell them about the open door, about the pearl, about the strange feeling of dread that had been a constant companion since that night. But I was a stable boy. I was a ghost in their world. My words, I knew, would be dismissed as idle gossip, as a child's overactive imagination. So I stayed silent, the pearl a heavy secret in my pocket, my knowledge a silent, terrible burden. But I was not the only one who believed something was terribly wrong. Mr. Finch, the old butler, a man with a face like a wrinkled apple and a pear, of eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 seasons, was a man who had known Miss Vance his entire life. He had served her family for over 40 years, and he was fiercely loyal to her, even in her disgrace. He was a man of quiet, unspoken dignity, a man who had seen the inner workings of Newport society for decades. He was the one who found the pearl on the floor of the entryway, the one who had felt the cold, lingering dread of a house with a secret. I found him one afternoon in the stables, an old, forgotten place that had once been the pride of the Vance estate. He was sitting on a bale of hay, his hands, which were usually so steady, now trembling. He saw me, and a look of profound sorrow and relief washed over his face. "You were there, weren't you, boy?" he said. his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You saw the door. You felt the chill." I nodded, unable to speak. The secret was shared. He told me that Miss Vance had not run away. She had not fled her shame. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she had been a different woman. She had been nervous, anxious, and had often locked herself in her rooms for hours on end, refusing to see anyone. But she had also been defiant. He had seen her, on a few occasions, leave the house at odd hours, in a simple dress, her face shrouded by a veil. She was meeting someone, not the painter, not the man who had caused her disgrace, but a different man. A tall, pale man with a dark, severe suit, and a face that seemed to absorb the light. Mr. Finch didn't know who he was or what he wanted. He just knew that his presence, his quiet, unnerving power, was a new, sinister element in Miss Vance's life. He had found a letter in her room, a final, terrible testament to her secret, a letter that spoke of a debt that had to be paid, of a promise that had to be kept. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a secret, of a debt, of a promise that had to be kept. It was a story that was far more sinister, far more terrifying than anyone in Newport society could ever imagine. And I, a mere stable boy, was now an unwitting witness to its terrible unspoken truth. The unspoken bond between Mr. Finch and me, a stable boy and a butler, was a fragile, desperate thing. We were two ghosts in a world of opulence and deceit, united by a terrible secret. The police, those men of logic and science, had closed the case. They had filed their reports, dismissed the servants' stories, and chalked up Miss Vance's disappearance to a socialite's whim. They had seen a simple story and had neatly tied a bow on it. But we, the outsiders looking in, knew the truth was far more sinister. The single pearl in my pocket and the desperate words of a letter in Mr. Finch's possession were the only remaining threads of a story that had been buried under a mountain of lies. Our investigation was a quiet, dangerous affair, a series of hushed conversations held in the shadows of the stables and the forgotten corners of the Vance estate. We were two spies in our own world, trying to piece together a narrative that had been deliberately obscured. Our first clue, the one that held the key to the entire mystery, was the letter. Mr. Finch had found it tucked away in a hidden compartment of Miss Vance's dressing table, a final, terrible testament to a secret that had haunted her family for generations. The letter was not a love letter, nor was it a confession. It was a cold, formal document, written on a crisp, heavy parchment, its words precise and unforgiving. It spoke of a debt that had to be paid, of a legacy that had to be upheld, and of a promise that had to be kept. The letter, which was addressed not to Miss Vance herself, but to the current heir of the Vance line, detailed a pact that had been made over a century ago. The Vance family, in a moment of great financial desperation, had made a deal with an unknown entity. In exchange for a promise of perpetual wealth and influence, they had to provide a payment every 100 years. The payment, the letter chillingly explained, was a soul, the soul of a Vance heir, the soul of a woman who had come of age in the year of the centennial, the soul of Miss Eleanor Vance. The words of the letter were like a physical blow. The shame, the disgrace, the ruined engagement. It was all a cover, a carefully constructed narrative to hide a far more terrible truth. Miss Vance hadn't fled her shame. She had been preparing for her sacrifice. Her reclusiveness, her anxiety, her strange, veiled excursions into the night. It was all part of a terrible, unspoken ritual that had been waiting for 100 years to reach its conclusion. Our next clue was the man, the tall, pale man with the dark, severe suit and a face that seemed to absorb the light. Mr. Finch had only seen him a few times, a silent, spectral figure who would appear on the Vance grounds at odd hours, always on the fringes of sight. He wasn't a suitor or a romantic rival. He was a collector, a representative of the debt. We began to ask questions, discreetly, carefully, to the other servants on the neighboring estates. We spoke to maids who had seen him from their windows, to stable boys who had seen his carriage on the bridle paths. The description was always the same: a tall, pale man with a dark suit and a face that was both unremarkable and profoundly unsettling. No one knew his name. No one knew where he came from. He was a ghost, a presence that was tied to the Vance family, and he was the one who had come to collect. Our investigation led us to the most unlikely of places, the Vance family graveyard. It was a small, quiet, forgotten patch of land at the edge of the estate, surrounded by a low stone wall and a tangle of ancient skeletal trees. It was a place of silence and death, a place that held the secrets of the Vance family's past. Mr. Finch, a man who had been a part of the family for over 40 years, had never seen the inside of the graveyard. He had always been forbidden to go there. But with Miss Vance's disappearance, the old rules no longer applied. We snuck in one afternoon, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests. The air in the graveyard was cold and heavy, carrying a faint, earthy smell that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The tombstones were old, some of them so weathered that the names had been erased by time. But on one tombstone, a recent one, the name was still visible: Sterling Vance. It was the name of Eleanor's father. But that wasn't what was strange. What was strange was the date of his death. It was the year of Eleanor's birth. The discovery was a chilling, terrible piece of a puzzle we were only just beginning to put together. Eleanor's father had not died of natural causes. He had been a part of the pact, a terrible unspoken secret that had been passed down through generations. He had paid a price that had been promised to a new heir, to his own daughter. The scandal, the disgrace, the ruined engagement, it was all a diversion, a carefully constructed lie to hide a far more terrible truth. The Vance family was not just a family of wealth and influence. They were a family of debt, a family of a promise that had to be kept. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a pact, a promise, and a terrible, unforgivable debt that had been waiting for 100 years to be paid. And I, a mere stable boy, was now a witness to its terrible, unspoken truth. The discovery of that old tombstone, with its chilling message of a life given on the year a new life was born, shattered the last remnants of our comfortable ignorance. The story of Miss Eleanor Vance was not a tale of a disgraced socialite. It was a story of a promised sacrifice. And I, a stable boy, was now privy to a secret that had been buried in the cold earth for generations. The fear that had been a constant companion since her disappearance now had a new, terrifying face. It was the face of a pact, a debt, a terrible, unforgivable promise that had been waiting for 100 years to be paid. Mr. Finch and I, two unlikely guardians of a terrible truth, spent the next few days in a haze of whispered theories and desperate hopes. We knew the police would not help us. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. Our only hope was to unravel the rest of the mystery ourselves, to find the truth, and to, in some small way, honor Miss Vance's desperate struggle. We had the letter, the pearl, and the chilling knowledge of the family graveyard. But we needed more. We needed to know the full truth of the pact. Our search led us to the vast, echoing library of the Vance mansion, a place of profound silence and even more profound secrets. Mr. Finch, his hands trembling with a fear that was more primal and more powerful than any I had ever seen, led me to a hidden compartment in the back of a large mahogany bookshelf. Inside, tucked away from the prying eyes of the outside world, was a series of old, leather-bound journals. They were the journals of the Vance family, a terrifying, detailed account of their macabre history. The journals were a chilling, terrible testament to a family's descent into a profound and ancient evil. They spoke of the pact, not as a contract, but as a living, breathing presence. They spoke of an entity, a dark, nameless force that had been the source of the Vance family's wealth and influence for generations. The pact was a simple one, a life for a dynasty. Every 100 years, a new heir, a woman born on the year of the centennial, was to be offered as a payment for the family's continued prosperity. The journal spoke of the tall, pale man with the dark, severe suit as the emissary of this entity, a creature of cold purpose who would appear to collect on the debt. The words of the journals were like a physical blow. They made no sense, and yet they made all the sense in the world. Miss Vance's father had not died of natural causes. He had been a part of the pact. He had known, from the day she was born, that his daughter, his only child, was not his to keep. He had known that she was to be the payment, the sacrifice, the final piece in a terrible, unending cycle of life and death. But the journals also revealed something else, something that shattered our perception of Miss Vance as a helpless victim. She was not. She knew about the pact. She had known about it since her youth, a terrible secret that had been passed down from her mother, a secret that had been a constant low-level dread in her life. But she was not a woman of quiet resignation. She was a woman of fierce, unyielding will, a woman who was not willing to be a pawn in a game of ancient macabre horror. She was a woman who was fighting back. Her disgrace, the scandal, the ruined engagement. It was all a cover, a carefully constructed narrative to hide a far more terrible truth. She had not been discovered in a compromising situation. She had arranged it. She had deliberately ruined herself, made herself unworthy in the eyes of Newport society so that she would be unclean in the eyes of the pact. She was a woman who was trying to break a cycle of 100 years with a simple act of defiance. Her lover, the painter, Julian, was not just a lover. He was a symbol of her rebellion, a final, defiant act to save her soul from a fate that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. The journals provided us with a new, chilling clue. In a final, desperate entry, Miss Vance had written of a hidden place, a place where she had hidden a final, terrible testament to her secret. A place that the emissary of the pact, the tall, pale man, could not find. A place that was so close, and yet so far away. The entry was a cryptic poem, a series of veiled metaphors that spoke of the last light of a setting sun, of a broken heart on a cold stone, and of the silent watchman in the dark. The search for this hidden place was a desperate race against time, a final desperate hope to find the truth, to find Miss Vance, and to, in some small way, to save her. We knew the police would not help us. We knew the society of Newport would not believe us. We were two ghosts in a world of opulence and deceit, a boy and a butler, fighting a battle against a pact that had been made 100 years ago, a pact that was now about to reach its terrible conclusion. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a brave, defiant woman, of a terrible, unforgivable pact, and of a secret that was waiting to be discovered, a secret that was buried in the cold, hard earth of Newport. And I, a mere stable boy, was about to become an unwitting participant in its final, terrifying chapter. The knowledge of the Vance family's dark pact was a heavy, suffocating blanket that had been thrown over my simple, honest life. The disgrace, the broken engagement, the scandal, it was all a finely woven lie to hide a far more terrible truth. Miss Eleanor Vance was not a woman who had fled her shame. She was a woman who was fighting for her life, a woman who was trying to break a cycle of 100 years with a simple act of defiance. And the only remaining clues to her whereabouts were a few lines of a cryptic, chilling poem, a series of veiled metaphors that spoke of a last light, a broken heart, and a silent watchman. Mr. Finch and I, a stable boy and a butler, were now the only ones in Newport who knew the truth. We were two ghosts in a world of opulence and deceit, a pair of unlikely detectives on a desperate search for a secret that had been buried in the cold earth for generations. The police, those men of logic and science, had moved on. Their report was filed, the case was closed, and Miss Vance's memory, like her reputation, was now a forgotten, shameful thing. But for us, the search had just begun. We returned to the Vance Library, to the vast, echoing cavern of shadows and secrets. The old journals, a terrifying, detailed account of a family's descent into a profound and ancient evil, were now our guides. We reread Miss Vance's final entry, a haunting, poetic testament to her secret. The words, "The last light of a setting sun," "A broken heart on a cold stone," and "The silent watchman in the dark," were a puzzle, a series of riddles that held the key to her whereabouts. We started our search in the places that seemed most likely. The last light of a setting sun could be the lighthouse at the edge of the harbor, a beacon of hope and light in a world of profound darkness. We spent an entire afternoon there, our eyes scanning the rocky shore, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests. But we found nothing. The broken heart on a cold stone could be a statue in the rose garden, a statue that had been broken by time or neglect. We scoured the garden, our hands and knees a mess of thorns and dirt, but we found nothing. The silent watchman in the dark could be a gardener's shed, a place of tools and silent sentinels. We searched the sheds, our bodies, a mess of cuts and bruises, but we found nothing. Our frustration, a powerful and terrible force, was starting to get the better of us. The clues were everywhere, and yet they were nowhere. The secret was so close, and yet it was so far away. The feeling of being watched, a constant low-level dread, was starting to get to us. The tall, pale man, the emissary of the pact, was also searching. We found his footprints in the garden, a cold, hard piece of proof that we were not alone in our search. He was a creature of cold purpose, and he was getting closer. Then, in a moment of quiet, desperate clarity, the words of the poem clicked into place. The broken heart on a cold stone wasn't a statue. It was a specific tombstone, the one in the Vance family graveyard, the one with the date of Miss Vance's father's death. It was a heart that had been broken by a terrible pact, a heart that was now a cold, hard piece of a secret that had been buried for generations. The silent watchman in the dark wasn't a shed. It was a massive, ancient oak tree that stood at the edge of the graveyard, its branches a twisted, gnarled wall of shadows and dread. The tree, which had been a silent witness to 100 years of a family's dark history, was now a silent sentinel, a guardian of a final, terrible secret. And the last light of a setting sun wasn't a lighthouse. It was the final, fading light of the sun on a specific spot in the graveyard. The light, a pale gold sliver of hope, fell on the broken tombstone, a silent, terrible beacon in a world of profound darkness. The three clues, once a series of separate riddles, were now a single, unified truth. The secret was in the graveyard. The final clue was there, waiting for us. We rushed back to the graveyard, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests. We arrived, just as the last sliver of twilight was fading from the sky. The light, a pale golden glow, fell on the broken tombstone, illuminating a small, barely visible marking on its side. It was a small, crudely carved arrow, a silent, defiant message that was pointing toward the base of the old oak tree. We dug. With our bare hands, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests, we dug. We dug through the cold, hard earth, the smell of damp soil and ancient secrets filling our nostrils. After what felt like an eternity, We found it. A small, wooden box, no bigger than my two hands, wrapped in a piece of burlap cloth. It was cold and damp beneath our fingers, a final, tangible testament to a secret that had been buried for generations. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a pact, a promise, and a terrible, unforgivable debt that was about to reach its terrifying conclusion. And I, a mere stable boy, was about to become an unwitting participant in its final chilling chapter. The secret of Newport's high society, the dark and macabre history of a family, was finally about to be revealed. The small wooden box was cold and damp beneath our fingers, a final, tangible testament to a secret that had been buried for generations. The air in the graveyard was thick with a profound, suffocating silence, a silence that was broken only by the frantic drumming of our hearts. We had found it. We had found Miss Eleanor Vance's final, desperate message to the world. Mr. Finch, his hands trembling with a fear that was so profound it had become a physical thing, pried open the lid. Inside, tucked away in a small, velvet-lined compartment, was a single silver key and a small, leather-bound journal. The key was old, with a strange, intricate design that I had never seen before. The journal, its cover worn and faded, was Miss Vance's own, a direct and personal account of her life, her disgrace, and her desperate plan. We did not read it there, in the silent, watchful world of the graveyard. We returned to the quiet shadows of the stables, to the sanctity of a world that was so far removed from the cold, cruel world of Newport society. We sat in the dim light of a single lantern, the air thick with the scent of hay and old leather, and we read Miss Vance's words. Her journal was not a record of social events or daily life. It was a terrifying, heartbreaking account of a life lived in the shadow of a terrible secret. She wrote of her childhood, of the subtle hints and cryptic warnings from her mother, of a family history that was tied not to prestige and wealth, but to a profound and ancient evil. She wrote of the day she learned the truth, of the terrible, unforgivable pact that had been made 100 years ago, a pact that had been paid with the lives of her ancestors, and a pact that was now about to be paid with her own. Her words painted a picture of a woman who was not a helpless victim, but a fierce, determined warrior. She wrote of her rebellion, of her desperate, almost insane plan to break the pact. She knew the tall, pale man, the emissary of the pact, was looking for a pure soul, a clean slate, an untainted offering. Her public disgrace, her ruined engagement, her scandal with the painter, Julian, was all a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to make herself unclean. She believed that if she could make herself unworthy of the pact, she could break the cycle for good. She was trying to ruin herself to save herself, a profound and tragic act of rebellion. But her plan, she wrote, had a terrible flaw. The pact, an ancient, living, breathing thing, was not so easily fooled. It did not care for social rules or human concepts of pure or unclean. It cared only for the blood of the Vance line. The pact, she realized, was a debt that had to be paid, regardless of the vessel. The tall, pale man was still coming. He was still looking for her, and she, in her desperation, had to find a new way to fight back. Her journal also revealed a final crucial clue. She wrote of a man, a scholar, a man who had helped her with her plan, a man who was an expert on the history of ancient pacts and old bloodlines, a man who had told her of a place that the emissary of the pact, the tall, pale man, could not enter, a place where she had hidden her final crucial piece of information, a piece of information that was not just a testament to her secret, but a weapon against it. The journal contained a final, desperate message, a coded message that spoke of a meeting place, a place that was hidden in plain sight in the heart of Newport. The revelation of Miss Vance's plan was a bombshell. She was not a disgraced socialite. She was a hero. She was a woman who had fought a terrible ancient evil with nothing but her own wit and courage. But her journal also left us with a chilling sense of dread. The tall, pale man was still out, there, and he was getting closer. The next day, we were no longer just detectives. We were fugitives. We were being hunted. As Mr. Finch and I were walking through the streets of Newport, a world that was now a place of profound and tangible danger, we saw him, the tall, pale man with the dark, severe suit. He was standing in the shadows of a grand Gothic cathedral, his pale, cold eyes scanning the crowd with a terrible, silent intensity. He was not looking for us. He was looking for her. He was looking for the secret that she had hidden, the secret that we now possessed. We ducked into a small, crowded cafe, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests. We were a boy and a butler, two small, insignificant pieces in a grand, terrifying game of life and death, and we were being hunted by an ancient, terrible evil. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a pact, a promise, and a terrible, unforgivable debt that was about to reach its terrifying conclusion. And I, a mere stable boy, was about to become an unwitting participant in its final chilling chapter. The secret of Newport's high society, the dark and macabre history of a family, was finally about to be revealed, and we were the ones who would reveal it. The sight of the tall, pale man in the shadows of the cathedral was a cold, hard piece of proof that we were no longer just detectives. We were fugitives. We were being hunted. The air around him was cold and still, a pocket of dead air in a world of bustling life. He was a creature of cold purpose, and his eyes, a pair of pale, unblinking orbs, were scanning the crowd with a terrible, silent intensity, looking for the secret that Miss Vance had hidden, a secret that we now possessed. We ducked into a small, crowded cafe, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests, the warmth of the room, a welcome, temporary sanctuary from the cold, inhuman gaze of our pursuer. Mr. Finch, his hands trembling, pulled out Miss Vance's journal, his face a mask of profound, unshakable fear. "He's getting closer," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "He knows we have it. We have to find Dr. Cross. He's our only hope." The journal, a heartbreaking personal testament to a woman's courage, contained a coded message about the scholar who had helped her. It was a series of veiled metaphors that spoke of a house of forgotten knowledge, a library of 1,000 sorrows, and a man who spoke the language of the dead. We knew it wasn't a real place. It was a description of a man, a scholar who was an expert on ancient pacts and old bloodlines. His name, a name that was scribbled in a hurried, almost panicked hand, was Dr. Alistair Cross. Our search for Dr. Cross was a desperate race against time. We spent the next few days in a blur of frantic inquiries, a pair of ghosts moving through the bustling streets of Newport, a world that was now a place of profound and tangible danger. We asked questions to librarians, to historians, to booksellers, our words a low, urgent murmur that was swallowed by the chaos of the city. We were a pair of unlikely detectives, a boy and a butler, fighting a battle against an ancient, terrible evil. And then, in a small, dusty bookstore on a forgotten street, we found him. Dr. Alistair Cross was an old, stooped man with a face like a map of 1,000 sorrows and a pair of eyes that held the quiet weariness of a man who had seen too much. He was a man who lived in a world of words and old paper, a man who spoke the language of the dead. He was terrified when we showed him the journal, his hands trembling as he read Miss Vance's words, his face a mask of profound, unshakable grief. He led us to a small, cluttered office in the back of the bookstore, a place filled with old books, strange maps, and the faint, dusty scent of 1,000 forgotten secrets. He told us everything. He told us about the pact, not as a story, but as a terrible, living, breathing thing. He told us that the pact was not a debt of a life, but a debt of a soul, a debt that was paid to an entity that was tied to the Vance bloodline, a creature that had been a source of their wealth and influence for centuries. He told us that the tall, pale man, the emissary of the pact, was not a man at all. He was a physical manifestation of the pact itself, a creature of cold purpose who would appear to collect on the debt. He told us that the key, the small silver key that we had found in the wooden box, was not to a box, but to a hidden chamber in the Vance mansion, a place where the pact's power was concentrated. The revelation was a chilling, terrible piece of a puzzle we were only just beginning to put together. Miss Vance's plan, Dr. Cross explained, was not just to escape. It was to use her public disgrace as a diversion, a willing sacrifice to make the pact believe its harvest was ready. While it was searching for her, she planned to use the key to lock the pact's manifestation away, to sever its connection to the Vance bloodline and to the world, to break a cycle of 100 years for good. But her plan, he said, had a terrible flaw. The emissary of the pact, the tall, pale man, was getting closer. He was not looking for her. He was looking for the key, and he knew we had it. Just as he spoke, a shadow, a tall, gaunt silhouette with a pair of pale, unblinking eyes, appeared. At the window of the bookstore, he was not a man. He was a creature of cold purpose, a creature of 1,000 years of an unforgivable pact, and he was staring directly at us. The air around him was cold and still, a pocket of dead air in a world of bustling life. The game, which had been a desperate race for a secret, was now a desperate race for our lives. We ran. We ran out of the bookstore, our hearts a frantic drumbeat in our chests, the key a constant heavy reminder of our mission. We were a boy, a butler, and a scholar, a trio of unlikely heroes, fighting a battle against an ancient, terrible evil. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a brave, defiant woman, of a terrible, unforgivable pact, and of a secret that was waiting to be discovered. And we, a trio of small, insignificant people, were about to become an unwitting participant in its final, chilling chapter. The macabre history of the Fairfax family, the dark and sinister secret of Newport's high society, was finally about to be revealed, and we were the ones who would reveal it. The world outside the bookstore was a blur of noise and light, a chaotic symphony that was a welcome, temporary sanctuary from the cold, inhuman gaze of our pursuer. We were a boy, a butler, and a scholar, a trio of unlikely heroes, and we were running for our lives. The tall, pale man, a creature of cold purpose, was right behind us, a physical manifestation of a terrible, unforgivable pact that had been a source of a family's wealth and influence for centuries. We had the key, a small silver key that was a testament to a woman's courage, and we had the knowledge to fight back. Our only hope was to get to the hidden chamber in the Vance mansion before the emissary of the pact could get to us. Our race back to the mansion was a desperate, terrifying journey. The familiar streets of Newport, once a place of beautiful homes and manicured lawns, were now a landscape of shadows and profound danger. The air was cold and still, a pocket of dead air that seemed to follow us, a constant reminder of the ancient evil that was chasing us. Dr. Cross, a man whose body was old and weary, but whose mind was sharp and fierce, ran with a profound, unshakable purpose. Mr. Finch, his hands trembling with a fear that was so primal it had become a physical thing, ran beside me, his grip a tight, desperate force. I ran, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest, the key a constant, heavy reminder of my mission. We finally arrived at the Vance mansion, a grand Gothic structure that was a monument to both opulence and profound evil. The front door, A heavy oak monstrosity with a gleaming brass knocker shaped like a lion's head was a final, terrible barrier. Dr. Cross, a man of profound knowledge, a man who had spent his life reading the language of the dead, was the one who knew the secret. He told us that the key, the small silver key that we had found in the wooden box, was not to a box, but to a hidden chamber in the mansion, a place where the pack's power was concentrated. We ran inside, the hinges of the door groaning with a sound that echoed in the profound silence of the grand entryway. The interior of the mansion was a vast, echoing cavern of shadows and gloom. Dr. Cross led us through the labyrinthine corridors, his movements a blend of frantic urgency and a profound, ancient knowledge. He led us to the vast, echoing library, a place of profound silence and even more profound secrets. He pointed to a section of the wall that was covered in a heavy tapestry. "Behind that," he said, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "The chamber, the key to our salvation." We pulled aside the tapestry, our hands trembling with a mix of fear and a profound, desperate hope. Behind the tapestry, a small, ornate door, its surface covered in strange, intricate symbols, was waiting. The key, a small silver key that was a testament to a woman's courage, was the key to the chamber. A final, chilling testament to a woman who had given her life for the truth. Just as we were about to turn the key, a shadow, a tall, gaunt silhouette, with a pair of pale, unblinking eyes, appeared in the doorway. It was the tall, pale man. He was not a man. He was a creature of cold purpose, a creature of 1,000 years of an unforgivable pact, and he was staring directly at us. The air around him was cold and still, a pocket of dead air in a world of bustling life. The game, which had been a desperate race for a secret, was now a desperate race for our lives. The confrontation was not a physical fight. It was a battle of wills, a battle of a creature of cold purpose and a trio of unlikely heroes who were fighting for the truth. The tall, pale man spoke, his voice a low, dry rasp that seemed to come from the very air itself. "The harvest is ready," he said. "The debt must be paid." But Dr. Cross, a man who had read the language of the dead, was ready. "The debt has been paid," he said, his voice a low, defiant roar. "But not with a soul, with a key to your prison. And with that," he plunged the key into the lock. The sound was a terrible, mournful shriek that seemed to come from the very earth itself, a sound that was so filled with agony and so full of despair that it shattered the very air around us. The tall, pale man, a creature of cold purpose, let out a final, terrible scream, and then, in a flash of blinding, beautiful light, he disappeared. The mansion was silent. The air, which had been charged with a humming, resonant energy, was now still. The Vance family's dark secret, a terrible, unforgivable pact that had been a source of their wealth and influence for centuries, was finally broken. Miss Eleanor Vance, a woman who had fought an ancient evil with nothing but her own wit and courage, was a hero. Her sacrifice, a sacrifice of her reputation and her life, had not been in vain. She had not only saved her own soul, she had saved her family's soul, and she had broken a cycle of 100 years. My journey was over. I had found the outside world, and I had delivered my message. Mr. Finch was a hero, a man who had fought a battle against an ancient, terrible evil. Dr. Cross, a man of profound knowledge, was a man who had finally found a truth that had been hidden for centuries. I was no longer just a boy from a forgotten valley. I was a survivor, a witness, and a voice for the voiceless. The untold story of the disgraced socialite who disappeared was no longer a story of social ruin. It was a story of a brave, defiant woman, of a terrible, unforgivable pact, and of a secret that was finally revealed, a secret that was buried in the cold, hard earth of Newport. And I, a mere stable boy, was an unwitting participant in its final, chilling chapter. My childhood was a thing of the past. My life was now a story of a boy who had escaped the darkness to find the light. A story of hope, a story of truth, and a story of a community that was finally, after 100 long years, free.